Welcome. I trust you are ready for a new mystery to unfold.
Death at the Grand Hotel Reception, a Hercule Poirot mystery, narrated by Stephen for Cozy Mysteries. Welcome to Cozy Mysteries. I'm Stephen, and today I bring you a tale of deception and murder from the luxurious corridors of London's Grand Imperial Hotel. Our story follows the brilliant Belgian detective Hercule Poirot as he unravels a mystery that began with a simple exchange of keys and ended in death. Chapter 1. The Key That Unlocked Death. The Grand Imperial Hotel stood as a monument to Edwardian elegance on Park Lane, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers, speaking of an era when service was an art form. Built in 1898 during the height of the British Empire's prosperity, the hotel had welcomed royalty, statesmen and titans of industry within its gilded walls. On this particular foggy November evening in 1924, the lobby hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked a truly superior establishment. The vast space featured soaring ceilings decorated with intricate plasterwork depicting scenes from classical mythology. Persian carpets covered the polished marble floors, while heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows that offered views of Hyde Park across the street. Electric lights had recently replaced the original gas fixtures, though the warm glow they cast still maintained the intimate atmosphere that guests had come to expect. Hercule Poirot sat in one of the deep leather armchairs positioned strategically near the great fireplace, his small, immaculately groomed hands wrapped around a delicate china cup containing his evening tisane. He had arrived that afternoon for a week's respite from his detective work, seeking nothing more than excellent cuisine, peaceful solitude, and perhaps the opportunity to observe the fascinating parade of humanity that passed through such establishments. The little Belgian, with his egg-shaped head tilted slightly to one side, observed the evening's activities with the idle interest of a man accustomed to watching human nature unfold in all its complexities. Behind the imposing mahogany reception desk, Mr. Edmund Carstairs performed his duties with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. At 62, he had served as head concierge for nearly 3 decades, his silver hair and dignified bearing making him as much a fixture of the hotel as the marble statuary positioned in the corners of the lobby. Guests trusted him implicitly with their secrets, their valuables, and their most delicate arrangements. He possessed the rare gift of discretion combined with efficiency, qualities that had made him indispensable to the hotel's most distinguished clientele. Carstairs moved through his evening routine with practiced ease, consulting the leather-bound guest register, reviewing tomorrow's arrangements, and ensuring that every detail of the hotel's operation met the exacting standards expected by those who paid premium rates for premium service. His dark uniform was impeccably pressed, his posture erect despite his years, and his manner carried the perfect balance of deference and authority that marked a true professional. The evening proceeded with typical tranquility until Lady Pemberton approached the desk. She was a woman of middle years, perhaps 45, elegantly dressed in black silk that spoke of expensive tailoring and impeccable taste. Her diamond earrings caught the light from the electric fixtures above, and a string of pearls adorned her slender neck. Poirot had noticed her earlier during the dinner service, a guest who carried herself with the bearing of old money and older secrets, the kind of woman who commanded attention without ever appearing to seek it. Her movements were graceful but purposeful as she crossed the lobby, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. There was something in her manner that suggested urgency barely held in check, a tension that contradicted the casual nature of her approach to the reception desk. "Mr. Carstairs," Lady Pemberton said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of aristocracy tempered with genuine warmth, "I believe you have something for me." The concierge nodded gravely and reached beneath his desk with movements that seemed somehow different from his usual fluid efficiency. From a locked drawer that required 2 keys to open, a security measure reserved for the hotel's most valuable items, he withdrew a manila envelope, unmarked save for a small red wax seal bearing no distinguishing mark. As he handed it across the polished surface, his fingers seemed to tremble slightly, an observation that caught Poirot's attention immediately, for he had watched Carstairs handle similar exchanges throughout the evening without the slightest sign of nervousness. But it was what happened next that transformed a quiet evening into the opening moves of a deadly game. As Lady Pemberton accepted the envelope with gloved hands, Carstairs reached for something else, a brass room key attached to a heavy tag. The number 237 gleamed in the electric light as he pressed it into her palm with unusual force. "Room 237, he said, his voice oddly strained and barely above a whisper. "You'll find everything, as arranged." Lady Pemberton looked puzzled, her brow furrowing as she examined the key. "But I'm in room 156, Mr. Carstairs. Surely there's been a mistake." The concierge's face had gone pale, beads of perspiration forming on his brow, despite the cool November air that drifted in whenever guests entered or departed. His breathing had become shallow, and his grip on the edge of the desk had tightened until his knuckles showed white against his skin. "No mistake, madam," he managed to say, his voice carrying an urgency that penetrated even Lady Pemberton's aristocratic composure. "Room 237 is where you need to be." Those were Edmund Carstairs's final words. He collapsed behind the desk with a soft cry that cut through the lobby's murmured conversations like a blade, his hand clutching at his throat while his eyes widened with unmistakable terror. The sound of his fall, a heavy thud followed by the crash of an overturned inkwell and the scatter of papers, brought immediate chaos to the serene lobby. Hotel staff rushed forward from their various posts, guests gathered in worried clusters, and Lady Pemberton stood frozen, the mysterious envelope and wrong room key still clutched in her hands like evidence of some crime she couldn't yet comprehend. Chapter 2: The Telegram's Unfinished Warning. Poirot was among the first to reach the reception desk, his small frame moving with surprising agility for a man of his sedentary habits. His keen green eyes took in the scene with the professional interest of someone who had witnessed far too many unexplained deaths in his career. The overturned chair lay on its side, one wheel still spinning slowly. Spilled ink spread across important hotel documents like a dark stain of foreboding, and most significantly, the expression of terror frozen on the dead man's face suggested this was far from the peaceful passing of natural causes. The positioning of Carstairs's body told its own story. He had fallen backward, his right hand still extended toward Lady Pemberton as if trying to convey some final crucial message. His left hand clutched at his throat, fingers clawed in the unmistakable gesture of someone struggling for breath. The way his legs were positioned suggested he had been standing normally when whatever killed him struck with devastating swiftness. "Stand back, please," commanded Mr. Whitmore, the hotel manager, a thin man whose usual composure had been utterly shattered by the crisis unfolding in his lobby. His voice cracked slightly as he tried to maintain control of the situation. "Someone fetch Dr. Morrison from room 412, quickly now." Several staff members hurried to comply, their footsteps echoing through the marble corridors as they rushed toward the elevator banks. Other employees began the delicate task of managing the growing crowd of concerned guests while maintaining some semblance of the hotel's usual discretion. The Grand Imperial prided itself on handling even the most unusual situations with grace and privacy, qualities that were being severely tested this evening. But Poirot could see that no doctor would be needed for Edmund Carstairs. The concierge had departed this world with the same quiet efficiency with which he had served it for 3 decades. The only question now was whether his final act, giving Lady Pemberton what appeared to be the wrong room key, had been a mistake born of dying confusion, or a deliberate message from beyond the grave. Morrison arrived within minutes, a portly gentleman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling medical emergencies. He knelt beside the body with professional calm, his experienced hands checking for signs of life while his trained eye assessed the scene. After a thorough examination that lasted several minutes, he straightened with a grave expression. "I'm afraid Mr. Carstairs is beyond help," he confirmed what everyone already suspected. "Dead, and from the looks of it for several minutes now. Natural causes." Mr. Whitmore asked hopefully, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be disappointing. Dr. Morrison shook his head slowly. I'm afraid not. There's a distinctive odor about him, bitter almonds, though not everyone can detect it. Combined with the rapidity of his collapse and the expression on his face, I would say we're looking at cyanide poisoning. The word poisoning sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. Guests began murmuring among themselves, some moving closer for a better look while others retreated toward the lobby's exits. The hotel staff exchanged worried glances, understanding that this incident would have serious implications for the establishment's reputation. Poirot's sensitive nose had indeed caught the telltale aroma, barely perceptible beneath the hotel's usual fragrances of beeswax polish, fresh flowers and expensive perfumes. The speed of the poison's action suggested it had been administered mere minutes before Carstairs's collapse, but when, and by whom? The concierge had been alone behind his desk for most of the evening, interacting only with guests and staff in the normal course of his duties. As the hotel staff struggled to manage the crisis with professional dignity, Poirot noticed several curious details that others had overlooked in their shock and confusion. The drawer from which Carstairs had retrieved Lady Pemberton's envelope remained open, revealing other manila envelopes, each sealed with different colored wax: red, blue, green, yellow, black, white and purple. The arrangement suggested a deliberate system rather than random storage. On the polished mahogany surface of the desk lay a half-written telegram, the pencil still resting where it had fallen from the dead man's fingers. The Western Union form was partially completed in Carstairs's neat handwriting, but the message cut off mid-sentence in a way that suggested sudden interruption, rather than natural conclusion. Most intriguingly, the hotel's leather-bound reservation book was open to a page that showed room 237 listed as vacant, yet according to the notation in the margin, it had been reserved by someone whose name had been carefully erased with such thoroughness that only the faintest indentations remained in the paper. The erasure was too complete to be accidental. Someone had deliberately removed that information. Lady Pemberton finally found her voice, though it trembled with shock and confusion. "I don't understand any of this," she said, her aristocratic composure cracking like fine china under pressure. "Edmund arranged to give me some documents regarding my late husband's estate, but this room key, and the way he looked at me, it was as if he were trying to warn me of something terrible." Her words carried an undercurrent of fear that hadn't been present earlier in the evening. The elegant woman who had approached the desk with such confidence now seemed fragile and uncertain, clutching the envelope and key as if they might provide some anchor in an increasingly unstable world. The police arrived within the hour, led by Inspector Bradley, a methodical man in his early 50s whose reputation for thoroughness was well known throughout Scotland Yard. His greying hair was neatly combed despite the late hour, and his approach to crime scenes reflected years of experience with London's more sophisticated criminals. He nodded respectfully to Poirot, whose reputation had preceded him into official circles. "Monsieur Poirot," Inspector Bradley said with a slight bow that acknowledged both professional courtesy and genuine respect. "I understand you witnessed the incident. Would you mind sharing your observations with us?" "Naturellement," Inspector Poirot replied, his accent adding a musical quality to his precise English. "But first perhaps we might examine the evidence before it is disturbed further." He gestured toward the reception desk where hotel staff had been careful to leave everything exactly as it had fallen, understanding instinctively that this was now a crime scene. The half-written telegram proved particularly intriguing upon closer examination. In Carstairs's neat handwriting practiced from years of taking detailed guest requests, the message read, "Danger, stop documents compromised, stop, trust no one especially." The sentence ended there, the pencil having fallen from his dying fingers before he could complete his warning. Inspector Bradley studied the incomplete message with growing concern. To whom was he sending this telegram? Mr. Whitmore consulted his records with nervous efficiency, his hands shaking slightly as he turned pages in the hotel's communication logs. "According to our telegraph records, Mr. Carstairs requested telegram forms at 7:30 this evening. He often handled confidential communications for our distinguished guests, so such requests weren't unusual, but there's no indication of the intended recipient. He hadn't filled out that portion of the form yet. The warning, if warning it was, had come too late for Edmund Carstairs, but perhaps, Poirot mused as he studied the scene with growing interest, it was not too late for the living. Chapter 3. The chess pieces speak. The discovery of Carstairs' secret investigation transformed the case entirely. What had appeared to be a random poisoning was clearly a calculated murder designed to silence a man who had learned too much. But as Poirot studied the evidence scattered throughout room 237, he realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple case of blackmail or fraud. Inspector Bradley had summoned additional officers to secure the room and catalogue its contents. Meanwhile, Poirot focused on the chess piece symbols that marked each of the sealed envelopes. In his experience, killers who employed such elaborate schemes often couldn't resist displaying their cleverness through symbolism. "Inspector," Poirot said, pointing to the map with its red pins, "these locations, have you recognized any of them?" Bradley consulted his notes. "Several correspond to addresses mentioned in the financial documents. This one here," he pointed to a pin near Piccadilly, "is the office of Pemberton and Associates, Lord Pemberton's investment firm. This one in Kensington matches the address of the family solicitor. And this," Poirot indicated a pin placed at the Grand Imperial Hotel itself, "obviously where we are now. But look at this, Monsieur Poirot, there are dates written beside each pin. The hotel is marked with today's date, but the others span the past several months." A pattern was emerging. Carstairs had been tracking a series of events, carefully documenting meetings and transactions that spanned half a year. The timeline began just 2 weeks after Lord Pemberton's death, suggesting that the concierge's investigation had been triggered by something he learned during the estate settlement process. Poirot's attention was drawn to a leather-bound ledger hidden beneath a stack of newspapers. Inside, Carstairs had meticulously recorded the contents of various safe deposit boxes, storage facilities and private vaults. But more than simple inventory, these notes revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation that had been using Lord Pemberton's business network as cover. "Fascinating," Poirot murmured, running his finger down a column of figures. "Here we see systematic transfers of funds, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger official scrutiny. And look at these dates, they continue even after Lord Pemberton's death, which means someone else has access to his accounts," Bradley concluded. "Precisely. But who would have such access? The widow, the business partner, the family solicitor?" Poirot paused, then added quietly, "Or perhaps someone else entirely, someone who has been manipulating all of them." A soft knock at the door interrupted their examination. Mr. Whitmore entered, his face grave with concern. "Forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation downstairs. Lady Pemberton has collapsed in the lobby." They rushed to the elevator, Poirot's mind racing with possibilities. Had the killer struck again? Or was Lady Pemberton suffering from delayed shock after the evening's traumatic events? They found her in the hotel's small medical room, conscious but pale, attended by Dr. Morrison. "It's not serious," the doctor assured them. "A mild reaction to stress, I believe, but she was asking for you specifically, Monsieur Poirot." Lady Pemberton struggled to sit up as they entered. "Monsieur Poirot, I must tell you something. After I left you earlier, I went to my room and opened the envelope. The documents inside, they're not what I expected." "What did you find, madame?" "Insurance policies, life insurance policies that I've never seen before, all taken out in my name within the past 6 months. The beneficiary isn't my family, it's someone called E. Blackwood, the name that had been erased from the hotel's reservation book." Poirot felt the familiar thrill of pieces falling into place. "There's more," Lady Pemberton continued. "I found a note tucked behind the policies. It's in Edmund's handwriting, and it says, 'The pawn promotes to queen when it reaches the 8th rank. But beware, in this game, the queen is the ultimate target.'" Inspector Bradley frowned. "Chess terminology. But what does it mean?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed with understanding. "It means, Inspector, that we are dealing with someone who thinks several moves ahead." "Lady Pemberton, in the envelope you received, was there anything else?" Any other document or item? Yes, there was a small brass token, rather like a poker chip, but with a number engraved on it, 247. Another room number? Bradley observed. None, Poirot said quietly. Not a room number. I believe it is a safe deposit box number. Mr. Carstairs was directing Lady Pemberton to specific evidence that would expose the conspiracy that cost him his life. But as they spoke, Mr. Whitmore received an urgent message from the front desk. A guest in room 156, Lady Pemberton's room, had reported a break-in. The intruder had fled when interrupted, but not before ransacking the suite completely. They're looking for something, Lady Pemberton said, her voice barely above a whisper. But what? Poirot studied her face carefully. Perhaps, madame, they are looking for the same thing that your late husband discovered before his death. Tell me, did Lord Pemberton ever mention feeling threatened? Did he change his habits or express any fears in the weeks before he died? Lady Pemberton's eyes widened with sudden realization. Yes, he did. He started coming home at different times, taking different routes. He said it was just business precautions, but now, do you think Charles was murdered too? I think, madame, that your husband stumbled upon a criminal operation that has been using his business as a front, and I think that Mr. Carstairs discovered the same thing. Poirot paused, then added gravely, the question now is whether we can expose the truth before the killer decides to eliminate the final witness. Chapter 4, The Eighth Rank Revelation. The break-in at Lady Pemberton's room had been thorough but professional. Drawers were searched but not destroyed, papers examined but not scattered carelessly. This was the work of someone familiar with conducting searches, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Inspector Bradley's men had dusted for fingerprints and found several sets, but most belonged to hotel staff members who could account for their presence. The intruder had been careful, likely wearing gloves throughout the search. What troubles me, Poirot confided to the inspector as they examined the ransacked suite, is the timing. Why search Lady Pemberton's room after she had already retrieved the documents from Mr. Carstairs, unless what? Unless the killer believes there are additional documents that Lady Pemberton possessed independently, something her husband may have hidden before his death. Lady Pemberton, who had been housed in a new suite for security reasons, joined them as they concluded their examination. I've been thinking about what you asked regarding Charles's behavior before he died, she said. There was something I didn't mention earlier. About a month before his death, he gave me a safety deposit box key and made me promise to never use it unless something happened to him. Poirot leaned forward with intense interest. And did you use it after his death? No, I was so overwhelmed with grief and the funeral arrangements that I completely forgot about it. The key is in my jewelry box back at our London house. The number on this key, do you recall it? Lady Pemberton thought carefully. 247, I believe. Wait, that's the number on the token that Edmund gave me tonight. Voila, Poirot exclaimed. Mr. Carstairs was not giving you new information, madame. He was reminding you of something your husband had already arranged. The safety deposit box key. Your husband intended you to use it if anything happened to him. Inspector Bradley was already reaching for his telephone. I'll arrange for an escort to accompany Lady Pemberton to her home to retrieve the key, and first thing tomorrow, we'll examine the contents of that deposit box. But Poirot held up a warning hand. With respect, Inspector, I would suggest extreme caution. If our killer is as thorough as I suspect, Lady Pemberton's home may well be under surveillance. Perhaps it would be wiser to retrieve the key during daylight hours with adequate protection. As if summoned by Poirot's words of caution, Mr. Whitmore appeared at the door with a message that sent chills through the small group. Inspector Bradley, there's been another incident. We've found a guest unconscious in the service elevator. The man claims to be a private investigator who was hired to watch Lady Pemberton. They hurried to the basement level where the service elevator was located. The unconscious man, well-dressed but with the alert bearing of a professional investigator, was being attended to by Dr. Morrison. A wallet found on his person identified him as Mr. James Fletcher, a former Scotland Yard detective who now worked privately. When Fletcher regained consciousness, his story added yet another layer to the mystery. I was hired 3 days ago to watch Lady Pemberton, he admitted reluctantly.
My employer said she was in danger and needed protection, but insisted on remaining anonymous. I was attacked from behind while following her movements this evening. Did you see your attacker? Inspector Bradley asked. No, but I heard something before I lost consciousness. A man's voice saying, "The Queen must not reach the 8th rank." It meant nothing to me at the time, but given the chess references you've mentioned, Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Mr. Fletcher, this anonymous employer who hired you, how were you contacted? Through an intermediary at my usual office. The payment was made in cash, with instructions delivered by messenger. Very professional arrangement actually. And the messenger, a hotel employee, I was told, someone from this very establishment. The revelation that someone within the Grand Imperial Hotel had been involved in hiring Fletcher added a disturbing new dimension to the case. It suggested that their killer had been planning this evening's events for days, possibly weeks. Poirot requested a private meeting with Inspector Bradley and Mr. Whitmore. In the manager's office, with the door securely closed, he outlined his growing theory. Messieurs, we are dealing with someone who operates like a chess master, thinking multiple moves ahead. Consider the sequence of events. Lord Pemberton discovers evidence of a criminal conspiracy and creates a safety deposit box with proof. Before he can act on this knowledge, he dies, perhaps murdered though disguised as natural causes. But his widow doesn't know about the safety deposit box. Bradley continued the logic. Exactly, so our killer believes the evidence is safely buried. But then Mr. Carstairs, through his work with the estate, discovers the same information. He realizes the danger and begins his own investigation. Mr. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. You're suggesting that someone has been using my hotel as a base of operations? More than that, Poirot replied grimly. I believe someone within your hotel has been working with the killer all along. The ease with which they accessed Mr. Carstairs' activities, the inside knowledge of Lady Pemberton's meeting tonight, the ability to hire investigators through hotel staff, all of this points to an accomplice among your employees. Inspector Bradley leaned forward. Do you have any suspects? I have suspicions, but I need confirmation. Inspector, tomorrow when we examine the safety deposit box, I suggest we do so with great care. I believe the contents will finally reveal the identity of our killer, but it may also put Lady Pemberton in immediate mortal danger. As if the hotel itself was responding to the ominous nature of their conversation, the lights flickered momentarily, and somewhere in the building, a door slammed with finality. The Grand Imperial Hotel, once a haven of luxury and security, had become a dangerous maze where every shadow might conceal a killer waiting to make their final move. Chapter 5. The Banker's Secret Game. The following morning brought London's typical November drizzle, casting a grey pall over the city that seemed to match the sombre mood at the Grand Imperial Hotel. Lady Pemberton had spent a restless night under police protection, while Poirot had risen early to study the evidence they had gathered. Inspector Bradley arranged for a small convoy to escort Lady Pemberton to her Belgravia mansion. The house, a stately Georgian structure that spoke of old money and older traditions, seemed strangely quiet as they approached. The servants had been given leave following Lord Pemberton's death, leaving the vast rooms echoing with memories. Lady Pemberton led them to the master bedroom, where an ornate jewellery box sat on the dressing table. With trembling fingers, she opened the velvet-lined compartments until she found what they sought, a small brass key bearing the number 247. Charles always said this was our insurance policy, she said softly. I thought he meant our actual insurance. I never imagined. Your husband was a careful man, madame, Poirot observed. Careful enough to protect you even after his death.
The journey to the bank took them through London's financial district, where the massive buildings seemed to loom with their own secrets. The Imperial Trust Bank was a fortress of marble and steel, its vault located 3 floors below street level. Edgar Summerfield, the bank manager, personally escorted them to the vault. He was a thin, nervous man who kept adjusting his spectacles as he spoke. Box 247 was rented by Lord Pemberton approximately 6 weeks before his death, he informed them. He visited it only once, as far as our records show. The vault itself was an impressive sight. Rows upon rows of deposit boxes behind heavy steel bars, each one potentially holding secrets worth killing for. Box 247 was located in the most secure section, requiring 2 keys to open Lady Pemberton's key and the bank's master key. When the box was finally opened, its contents exceeded even Poirot's expectations. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a complete dossier on a money laundering operation that stretched the letter, written on Lord Pemberton's personal stationery and bearing his distinctive wax seal, revealed the full scope of his discovery and the terrible choice he had faced in his final weeks. It's Margaret. If you are reading this, then my fears have been realized and the threats against my life have been carried out. I pray that you will forgive me for not confiding in you about the danger we faced, but I believed that your ignorance would protect you from those who would stop at nothing to preserve their secrets. I have stumbled upon evidence of a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of London's financial community, involving individuals I once considered friends and business associates. Someone has been using my business network and my reputation to launder money from criminal enterprises across Europe, forging my signature on documents I never saw, and conducting transactions in my name without my knowledge or consent. The operation is sophisticated beyond anything I initially imagined. They have created false companies, manipulated bank records, and established a network of corrupt officials who facilitate the movement of illegal funds. The amounts involved are staggering, millions of pounds that should have been used for legitimate business purposes instead funding activities that I dare not even name in this letter. I have gathered proof of their activities, including recordings of conversations that will expose the truth about their operations, but I fear I am being watched constantly now, and my attempts to contact the authorities have been detected. The recording cylinder in this box contains conversations that will expose the full scope of their conspiracy, but you must be extremely careful about who you trust with this information. The conspiracy includes people in positions of authority who could suppress this evidence if they learned of its existence. Remember our chess games, my dear, and how I taught you that sometimes the most powerful piece must sacrifice itself to protect the king. In this case, I fear I am that piece, but my sacrifice will only have meaning if the truth eventually emerges. I have arranged for Edmund Carstairs at the Grand Imperial Hotel to assist you if needed. He has proven himself trustworthy and has already helped me document some of their activities. Trust him as you would trust me. Your loving husband, who hopes that justice will ultimately prevail, Charles. The letter's revelation that Lord Pemberton had been aware of the threat against his life confirmed Poirot's suspicions about the true nature of his death, but more importantly, it provided crucial insight into the conspiracy's structure and the recording that might contain the evidence needed to expose the perpetrators. The recording cylinder proved to be even more damning than the written evidence. Using a playback device that Mr. Summerfield provided from the bank's conference room, they listened to a conversation between Lord Pemberton and an unidentified man whose educated accent carried undertones of both authority and menace. Lord Pemberton, you're being unnecessarily difficult about this situation. Your signature on these transfer documents is a mere formality to legitimize transactions that are already complete. Formality. These documents authorize the movement of £2 million through accounts I've never opened, in banks I've never visited, accounts that exist in your name with your authorization, or so it will appear if questions are ever asked by the authorities. This is fraud on a massive scale, and I won't be party to it any longer. I'm prepared to contact the police and reveal everything I've learned about your operation. I'm afraid you don't have a choice in this matter, Charles. Your business reputation, your family's financial security, your wife's safety, all depend on your continued cooperation with our arrangements. Are you threatening my wife? Are you threatening me? I'm simply explaining the consequences of non-compliance. Accidents happen to people who refuse to be reasonable, Lord Pemberton, even to careful men who think they can outsmart forces larger than themselves. Asterisk. The recording ended there, but it provided crucial evidence of both the conspiracy's existence and the direct threat against Lord Pemberton's life. More importantly for their current investigation, Poirot noted that the voice of the unidentified man had distinctive qualities that suggested someone accustomed to command, someone whose orders were rarely questioned and whose authority was taken for granted. Inspector Poirot said thoughtfully as they prepared to leave the bank with their treasure trove of evidence. "I believe we must return to the hotel immediately. This recording may help us identify our killer. But first I need to confirm something about Mr. Carstairs' investigation." As they prepared to depart, Mr. Summerfield mentioned something that stopped Poirot in his tracks and added another piece to the puzzle they were assembling. "Oh, Lady Pemberton, I should mention that someone else inquired about your husband's box just yesterday, a gentleman who claimed to be from the estate's legal team." "Did this gentleman give his name?" Poirot asked with sharp interest. "He identified himself as Mr. A. Blackwood, representing the estate's legal interests. When I explained that only Lady Pemberton could access the box with the proper key, he became rather agitated and left abruptly." The mysterious Mr. Blackwood again, the name that had been erased from the hotel register, the beneficiary of the forged insurance policies discovered among Lady Pemberton's papers. The web of deception was tightening around a central figure whose identity remained tantalizingly out of reach, but Poirot sensed they were approaching the moment when all would be revealed. As their convoy returned to the Grand Imperial Hotel through London's busy streets, Poirot reflected on the chess metaphor that had woven itself through every aspect of the case. In chess, he knew the game often turned on a single move that revealed the true strategy behind what had appeared to be random attacks and defensive maneuvers. The evidence from the safety deposit box had provided them with the proof they needed to understand the scope of the conspiracy, but it had also confirmed that Lady Pemberton remained in mortal danger. Somewhere in London, possibly within the elegant confines of the Grand Imperial Hotel itself, a killer was preparing to make his final moves in a game that had already claimed 2 lives. The recording of Lord Pemberton's conversation had revealed not just the existence of the conspiracy, but the cold calculation of a criminal mind that viewed murder as simply another business transaction. This was not a crime of passion or desperation, but the methodical elimination of obstacles by someone who had built an empire on corruption and would not hesitate to kill again to protect it. As they approached the hotel, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of a case approaching its resolution. The pieces were finally falling into place, and he could see the outline of the killer's strategy. But he also knew that the most dangerous moment in any chess game was when a cornered opponent realized that defeat was inevitable, for that was when desperate moves and unexpected sacrifices could still change the outcome of the game. Chapter 6. The Voice from Beyond. The return journey to the Grand Imperial Hotel provided Poirot with crucial time to analyze not just the evidence they had discovered, but the subtle clues hidden within Lord Pemberton's final recording. As their police convoy navigated through London's increasingly busy afternoon traffic, the little Belgian detective played the conversation over and over in his mind, focusing not just on the words spoken but on the vocal characteristics that might reveal the speaker's identity. The recording device that Lord Pemberton had used was remarkably sophisticated for its time, capturing not only the conversation's content but subtle nuances of speech that an experienced investigator could use to build a profile of the unknown conspirator. The clarity of the recording suggested that it had been made in a quiet enclosed space, possibly Lord Pemberton's private office or study, where background noise would not interfere with the sensitive recording mechanism. "Inspector," Poirot said as their car turned onto Park Lane, "that voice on the recording, did anything about it strike you as particularly significant?" Bradley frowned in concentration, clearly trying to recall specific details from their listening session at the bank. "Now that you mention it, there was something distinctive about the intonation. Very educated, certainly, upper-class accent, but with something else underneath, perhaps military bearing. The way he spoke suggested someone accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question." "Precisely my observation," Poirot agreed, his green eyes reflecting his satisfaction at having his analysis confirmed. "And notice how he spoke of authority, of consequences. This is someone whose word carries significant weight in certain circles, someone who would be believed if he made accusations, trusted if he provided explanations." Lady Pemberton, who had been unusually quiet since hearing her dead husband's voice on the recording, finally spoke from her position in the rear seat of their vehicle. "Charles never told me he felt so threatened. He protected me from his worries, as he always did. If only I had known the danger he was facing." "Your husband was wise to keep you uninformed, madame," Poirot assured her gently. Knowledge of this conspiracy would have placed you in immediate danger, and his primary concern was clearly your safety rather than his own. When they arrived at the hotel, they found the lobby in a state of subdued excitement that suggested new developments had occurred during their absence. Mr. Whitmore met them at the entrance, his face grave with concern and his usual composure strained by the ongoing crisis affecting his establishment. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Bradley, we've had another development during your absence," he reported in low tones designed not to alarm the other guests who were going about their normal activities. "This morning, one of our housekeeping staff discovered something disturbing in room 237. After you finished examining it last night, we had the room locked and sealed as you requested, but somehow someone gained access." They hurried to the elevator with a sense of mounting urgency, understanding that any tampering with Carstairs' secret office could compromise crucial evidence or reveal the killer's hand more clearly. The journey to the second floor seemed longer than usual, each floor they passed adding to the tension that had been building since the previous evening's murder. The room's appearance when they entered confirmed their worst fears while also providing new insights into their adversaries' methods and priorities. While nothing appeared to have been stolen outright, the documents had clearly been disturbed by someone conducting a careful but thorough examination. More significantly, several of the financial records that had been carefully organized on Carstairs' desk were now missing key pages that likely contained the most incriminating evidence against specific individuals. "Professional work," Inspector Bradley observed, examining the precise way certain documents had been edited rather than simply removed. "Whoever did this knew exactly what to take and what to leave behind. They weren't trying to destroy all the evidence, just the parts that directly implicated certain people." But Poirot noticed something that the intruder had overlooked in their haste to remove incriminating materials. "Look here, Inspector." The intruder was not merely removing evidence, they were leaving something behind as well. On Carstairs' desk, placed prominently where it couldn't be missed, was a chess piece that hadn't been there during their previous examination, a black queen carved from ebony and polished to a high shine. Attached to its base with a small piece of wire was a note written in the same educated handwriting they had seen in Lord Pemberton's documents. "The Queen has reached the 8th rank. The game concludes tonight. All debts will be settled. E.B. Our mysterious Mr. Blackwood," Bradley concluded, studying the note with growing alarm. "He's announcing his intention to end this tonight, one way or another." Lady Pemberton paled visibly as she read the note, understanding instinctively that she was the Queen referenced in the chess metaphor. "But what does he mean exactly? End what?" Poirot studied the chess piece with growing understanding of their adversary's mindset and methods. "In chess, madame, when a pawn reaches the opposite end of the board, the 8th rank, it can be promoted to any piece the player chooses, usually a queen because of its power and versatility. But in this case, I believe our killer is suggesting that you, as the queen in his deadly game, have learned too much and acquired too much power to expose his conspiracy. Therefore, you must be eliminated before you can use that power against him." The implications were chilling and immediate. Blackwood had demonstrated his ability to access secure areas of the hotel, to manipulate staff members, and to kill without immediate detection. Now he was openly declaring his intention to target Lady Pemberton directly, suggesting either desperate confidence or calculating arrogance. Inspector Bradley immediately began arranging for additional security measures, posting officers both inside and outside the hotel while coordinating with Scotland Yard for backup personnel. But Poirot suspected that conventional protection might not be sufficient against an adversary who had already proven his ability to outmaneuver standard police procedures. "Inspector, I believe it is time for us to set a trap of our own," Poirot announced with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he had been developing this plan throughout their investigation. "But first I need to test a theory about our killer's identity that has been forming in my mind since we heard that recording." He requested access to the hotel's complete employment records, specifically focusing on staff members who had been hired within the past year and whose backgrounds might reward closer examination. Mr. Whitmore provided the files reluctantly, clearly concerned about the implications for his establishment's reputation and the privacy of his employees.
As Poirot studied the personnel records with the methodical thoroughness that characterized all his investigations, a pattern began to emerge that confirmed his growing suspicions about the killer's identity and methods. 3 employees had been hired in the months following Lord Pemberton's death, all with impeccable references that somehow failed to check out completely when examined with the kind of scrutiny that the current crisis demanded. But it was the 4th file that provided the crucial breakthrough that would ultimately lead to the killer's identification and capture. The employment record belonged to Mr. Edward Brightwood, hired as the hotel's assistant security manager just 2 weeks after Lord Pemberton's funeral, timing that could hardly be considered coincidental given what they now knew about the conspiracy. His references were perfect, his background impressive, and most significantly, his position provided him with complete access to hotel security systems, guest information, and staff schedules. Someone in his position could monitor activities throughout the building, arrange for strategic equipment failures, and even coordinate with outside accomplices without arousing suspicion. Edward Brightwood, Poirot murmured, the name carrying new significance as he considered its implications. E.B. But also, if one considers the letters more carefully, an anagram of E. Blackwood. Our killer has been hiding in plain sight, with access to every room, every guest, every secret in this hotel. The revelation that their killer had been operating from within the hotel's own security structure explained how he had managed to stay ahead of their investigation while planning his deadly chess game. But it also provided them with the opportunity to turn his own methods against him, using the hotel's systems and their knowledge of his identity to finally bring him to justice. The endgame of their deadly chess match was about to begin, and Poirot was determined that this time, the forces of justice would emerge victorious. E.B., but also an anagram of E. Blackwood. Our killer has been hiding in plain sight, with access to every room, every guest, every secret in this hotel. Inspector Bradley examined the employment file with growing excitement. According to this, Brightwood has exemplary credentials: former military officer, security experience in colonial service, personal references from high-ranking officials, references that I suspect will prove to be as fictional as his identity, Poirot observed, but more importantly, his position gives him complete access to hotel operations. He could monitor Mr. Carstairs' activities, arrange for Lady Pemberton's meeting, even hire investigators through hotel contacts. The trap Poirot proposed was elegantly simple. They would announce that Lady Pemberton had discovered additional evidence in her husband's papers, evidence that would be handed over to the authorities the following morning. The announcement would be made publicly in the hotel lobby, ensuring that Blackwood would learn of it immediately. He will be forced to act tonight, Poirot explained. His entire operation depends on eliminating the evidence and the witness. He cannot afford to wait. Lady Pemberton, despite her fear, agreed to serve as bait for the trap. Charles died trying to expose this conspiracy, she said with quiet determination. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless. As evening approached, the hotel took on an atmosphere of barely controlled tension. Plainclothes officers were positioned throughout the building, but Poirot insisted they remain inconspicuous. Their quarry was too clever to be caught by obvious surveillance. The announcement was made at precisely 8 o'clock, with Lady Pemberton standing prominently in the lobby, as she spoke to Inspector Bradley, in deliberately audible tones about the crucial evidence she had found, and her intention to deliver it to Scotland Yard first thing in the morning. Now all they could do was wait for E. Blackwood to make his move. Chapter 7. The Predator's Gambit. The Grand Imperial Hotel settled into an uneasy quiet as the evening progressed. Lady Pemberton had retired to her new suite on the 3rd floor, ostensibly for the night, while in reality she was protected by 2 armed officers concealed in adjoining rooms. The lobby maintained its usual elegant atmosphere, but experienced eyes could detect the subtle signs of surveillance: staff members who lingered a bit too long in certain areas, guests who seemed unusually observant of their surroundings. Poirot had positioned himself in the hotel's reading room, a vantage point that provided clear views of both the main staircase and the elevator bank. From here he could observe the movements of anyone attempting to reach the upper floors. Inspector Bradley maintained contact through a system of discreet signals, coordinated by Mr. Whitmore, who had proven himself surprisingly adept at clandestine operations. At 10:30, Poirot noticed the first sign that their trap was working. Edward Brightwood, the assistant security manager, emerged from the staff quarters and began what appeared to be a routine security patrol. But his route was anything but routine. He systematically checked locations that would allow him to monitor police positions without appearing suspicious. Brightwood was a man in his early 40s, of medium height, but with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His dark hair was graying at the temples, and he moved with the precise efficiency of military training. To the casual observer, he was simply a dedicated employee ensuring the hotel's security. To Poirot's trained eye, he was a predator calculating his approach to prey. The killer's first move came at 11 o'clock. A fire alarm sounded on the second floor, not loud enough to cause general panic, but sufficient to draw security attention away from the third floor. Inspector Bradley's men responded according to plan, maintaining their positions while appearing to investigate the alarm. Poirot watched as Brightwood used the distraction to access the service elevator, the same one where the private investigator Fletcher had been attacked. The elevator would take him directly to the third floor without passing through the main lobby, a route that avoided most of the surveillance positions. But Poirot had anticipated this move. He rose quietly from his chair and made his way to the main staircase, ascending to the third floor by a route that would intercept Brightwood's approach to Lady Pemberton's suite. The third-floor corridor was dimly lit by electric sconces, casting long shadows that provided excellent concealment. Poirot's Brightwood reached Lady Pemberton's door. Poirot observed him produce a set of professional lockpicks from his medical bag, tools that spoke of extensive training in covert operations. The man's expertise was evident as he worked on the lock with practiced ease, his fingers moving with the kind of precision that could only come from years of experience in clandestine activities. The lock mechanism yielded to his ministrations within moments, demonstrating both his skill and the vulnerability of even high-quality security measures when faced with professional expertise. What Brightwood didn't know, however, was that Lady Pemberton was not in the room he was entering. She had been moved to a secure location 2 floors below, as part of Poirot's carefully orchestrated trap, while the suite was now occupied by 2 armed officers who waited in darkness with weapons drawn and instructions to take the intruder alive if possible. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, and Brightwood slipped inside with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to moving through hostile territory without detection. For several minutes there was no sound from within the room except for the soft whisper of fabric against furniture as the intruder moved through the suite, searching for his intended victim. Then came the muffled sounds of a violent struggle, the crash of furniture being overturned, the sharp intake of breath from men engaged in physical combat, and voices raised in alarm as the trap was finally sprung. The officers had waited until Brightwood was fully committed to his attack before revealing themselves, ensuring that his intent to commit murder was clearly established. Poirot emerged from his concealment and moved swiftly to the doorway, arriving just as the struggle concluded. Inside the elegantly appointed suite, he found Brightwood pinned to the Persian carpet by 2 burly constables, his medical bag spilled open to reveal a syringe filled with what could only be a lethal dose of cyanide solution, the same poison that had killed Edmund Carstairs. The contents of the bag provided damning evidence of premeditated murder. In addition to the poisoned syringe, there were small glass vials containing various toxic substances, surgical instruments that could inflict fatal wounds while appearing to be medical procedures, and a collection of forged documents that would have allowed Brightwood to assume yet another false identity if his current operation failed. "Monsieur Brightwood," Poirot said calmly as he entered the room, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a puzzle finally solved. "Or should I say, Monsieur Blackwood, your elaborate game of chess has finally reached its conclusion, and I'm afraid the outcome is not what you anticipated." The man on the floor looked up with eyes that blazed with frustrated fury and the kind of cold intelligence that had made him such a dangerous adversary. When he spoke, his voice carried the same educated tones they had heard on Lord Pemberton's recording, confirming beyond doubt that they had captured the right man. "You interfering Belgian fool," he snarled, his cultured accent unable to disguise the venom in his words. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed tonight? The operation I built took years to establish, and it was providing services that certain elements of society found invaluable. An operation built on theft, fraud and murder." Poirot replied with quiet dignity. "Yes, I believe I understand its nature quite well, and I'm confident that society will be better served by its destruction." Inspector Bradley arrived with additional officers and the necessary paperwork to make the arrest official. As they searched Brightwood's person, they discovered additional evidence of his crimes, forged documents that would have allowed him to access bank accounts across Europe, a list of potential victims who had been targeted for various forms of financial manipulation, and most damning of all, a detailed plan for eliminating not just Lady Pemberton, but several other potential witnesses to his conspiracy. The plan revealed the true scope of Brightwood's criminal enterprise, and his ruthless determination to protect it at any cost. Names and addresses of individuals across London who had unknowingly become obstacles to his operation, along with specific methods for eliminating each threat while maintaining the appearance of natural causes or accidents. But even as they secured their prisoner and catalogued the evidence of his crimes, Poirot sensed that something was not quite right about Brightwood's demeanor. The man's confidence seemed excessive for someone who had just been caught in the act of attempted murder, suggesting that he still believed he held cards that could save him from the gallows.
Inspector, Poirot said quietly, drawing Bradley aside while the constables completed their search of the prisoner. I believe we should examine Mr. Brightwood's quarters immediately. This man is far too calm for someone facing the death penalty. His composure suggests that he may have additional insurance policies that we have not yet discovered. The search of Brightwood's rooms in the hotel's staff quarters, conducted with the thoroughness that characterized all of Poirot's investigations, revealed the true scope of his criminal enterprise and the sophisticated network he had built over several years of careful planning. Hidden behind a false wall that required considerable effort to locate, they found files on dozens of wealthy individuals who had been targeted for various forms of financial manipulation and exploitation. The files contained detailed dossiers on potential victims, including their financial holdings, personal vulnerabilities, family relationships, and daily routines. Each file represented hours of careful surveillance and investigation, demonstrating the systematic approach that had made Brightwood's operation so successful for so long. But most shocking of all was the discovery of extensive correspondence with highly placed officials in both government and financial institutions, men who had been either blackmailed into cooperation or bought outright with the proceeds of Brightwood's criminal activities. The letters revealed a web of corruption that stretched far beyond simple financial fraud, touching on matters of national security and international diplomacy. The conspiracy was far larger than they had initially imagined, and Brightwood's arrest was only the beginning of what would become one of the largest financial crime investigations in British history. The evidence they had uncovered would ultimately lead to the downfall of dozens of prominent figures and the exposure of systemic corruption that reached into the highest levels of society. As dawn broke over London, casting pale light through the hotel's tall windows and bringing an end to one of the longest nights in the Grand Imperial's distinguished history, Poirot reflected on the deadly game that had finally reached its conclusion. The chess metaphor had proven more apt than he had initially realized, for in the end, it had taken the sacrifice of pawns like Lord Pemberton and Edmund Carstairs to expose the king who had been manipulating the entire board. The forces of justice had emerged victorious, but at a cost that reminded everyone involved of the price that must sometimes be paid to preserve truth and protect the innocent from those who would exploit them without conscience or remorse. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit Exposed. The interrogation of Edward Brightwood took place in Scotland Yard's most secure facility, a grey stone building whose forbidding exterior matched the serious nature of the crimes being investigated within its walls. The questioning occurred in a windowless room designed to prevent both escape and outside interference, furnished only with a heavy wooden table, 4 chairs, and the kind of stark efficiency that characterized official police business. Inspector Bradley led the questioning with the methodical thoroughness that had made him one of Scotland Yard's most respected investigators, while Poirot observed from a position where he could study the prisoner's reactions and body language for clues that might reveal additional information about the conspiracy they had uncovered. Despite his arrest and the overwhelming evidence against him, Brightwood maintained an air of confident defiance that suggested he still believed he could escape the consequences of his actions. The prisoner had been allowed to clean himself and change into fresh clothing after his capture, restoring some of his natural dignity and authority. He sat upright in his chair with military bearing, his hands folded calmly on the table before him, showing no obvious signs of the stress that would be expected from someone facing charges of murder and treason. Your real name, if you please, Inspector Bradley began, his voice carrying the kind of official authority that had intimidated countless criminals over the years. Colonel Edward Blackwood, formerly of His Majesty's Colonial Service, the prisoner replied with military precision, his tone suggesting that he was providing this information as a courtesy rather than under compulsion. Though I suspect you've already deduced that much from your investigation, and your connection to the late Lord Pemberton. Blackwood's expression darkened with what appeared to be genuine anger at the mention of the banker's name. Pemberton was a fool who couldn't appreciate the larger picture that was being painted around him. We offered him a partnership in an enterprise that would have made him wealthy beyond his wildest imagination. Instead, he chose to play the role of the righteous citizen and moral crusader. The contempt in his voice revealed the depth of his frustration with those who had opposed his plans, suggesting that he viewed himself as someone whose vision and abilities were unappreciated by lesser minds. It was the attitude of a man who had convinced himself that his criminal activities were actually sophisticated business ventures. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his green eyes sharp with interest. This enterprise of yours, it was not merely financial fraud, was it? Tell us about the real purpose of your operation. For the first time since his arrest, Blackwood's composure cracked slightly, revealing a flicker of surprise that his interrogators had perceived the true scope of his activities. You think you're clever, don't you, Belgian? But you understand nothing about the forces at work in the modern world. The money laundering operation was just the beginning, a means to fund activities that would have reshaped the balance of power in Europe. The revelation sent chills through the interrogation room as the full implications of his words became clear. They were dealing with something far more serious than simple financial crime. This was a conspiracy that touched on matters of international security and political stability. What kind of activities? Inspector Bradley demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. Blackwood smiled coldly, clearly enjoying the effect his revelations were having on his interrogators. The Great War ended, Inspector, but the battle for supremacy among nations did not. There are those who believe that Britain's future lies not in clinging to old alliances and outdated democratic ideals, but in forging new partnerships with powers that understand the value of strength over sentiment. The implication was clear and terrifying. They were dealing with treason as well as murder. Blackwood had been using his network of financial corruption to fund activities that threatened national security and potentially the stability of the government itself. Lord Pemberton discovered this political dimension of your conspiracy. Poirot asked, his voice deceptively calm despite the gravity of what he was learning. Pemberton stumbled onto evidence of our financial operations first, yes. But what truly sealed his fate was his discovery of documents that revealed the political nature of our work. He threatened to expose everything to the authorities, never understanding that some of those very authorities were already working with us. Inspector Bradley's face hardened with the realization that the conspiracy reached into the government itself. You're claiming that officials in His Majesty's government were involved in your treasonous activities. I'm stating a documented fact, Blackwood replied with satisfaction. How do you think I maintained my operations for so long without detection? How do you think I gained access to sensitive financial information and government communications? This conspiracy reaches into the highest levels of British society, Inspector. Arresting me will barely scratch the surface of what you're dealing with. Poirot studied Blackwood carefully, noting the man's continued confidence despite his precarious legal position. There was something in his demeanor that suggested he still held cards that could protect him from the full consequences of his actions. You speak as though your arrest means nothing to the ultimate success of your conspiracy. Why is that, Colonel? Blackwood's smile widened with the kind of satisfaction that came from knowing secrets that others desperately wanted to learn. Because, my dear Belgian detective, you've caught the visible hand but not the hidden one. I may hang for my crimes, but the organization will continue without me. We've planned for such contingencies from the very beginning. The interrogation continued for several more hours, but Blackwood revealed little additional information beyond hints and implications designed to frustrate his questioners. However, the documents found in his quarters provided a comprehensive roadmap to the conspiracy's true scope and the network of corruption that had enabled its operations. Financial records showed money flowing to political groups across Europe that advocated for accommodation with Germany's rising military power and authoritarian government. Correspondence revealed connections to individuals who would later be recognized as early supporters of fascist movements that were beginning to emerge across the continent. The evidence painted a picture of a conspiracy that went far beyond simple criminal enterprise, touching on the fundamental questions of democracy, national sovereignty, and international security that would define European politics for decades to come. Blackwood and his associates had been working to undermine democratic institutions and prepare the ground for authoritarian governments that would be more amenable to their influence and control. Meanwhile, Lady Pemberton had been brought to Scotland Yard to provide additional testimony about her husband's final weeks and the discoveries that had cost him his life. Her account, combined with the evidence from the safety deposit box and Carstairs' investigation, painted a picture of a man who had accidentally discovered a threat to his country and died trying to expose it. Charles mentioned receiving strange visitors in his final weeks, she told Poirot and Inspector Bradley during her formal statement. Men who claimed to be potential business partners, but who asked questions that seemed unrelated to legitimate investments. He said they made him uncomfortable, but he never explained why he found them so disturbing. Your husband was a patriot, madame, Poirot said gently. He recognized that these men represented a danger that went beyond mere financial crime, and he was willing to sacrifice his life to prevent them from succeeding in their plans. The investigation that followed Blackwood's arrest would indeed prove him correct about the conspiracy's reach. Several prominent figures in London society were arrested in the weeks that followed, and the scandal rocked the British establishment. But Poirot suspected that many of the guilty would escape justice, protected by their positions and connections. As for Edmund Carstairs, the loyal concierge had died a hero's death, though the public would never know the full extent of his sacrifice. His investigation had provided crucial evidence that helped expose not just a financial conspiracy, but a threat to national security that could have changed the course of European history. The chess game that had cost so many lives was finally over, but Poirot reflected that the larger game of international politics was just beginning. The pieces that Blackwood and his associates had put in motion would continue to move across the board of European diplomacy, leading eventually to conflicts that would dwarf even the Great War that had recently ended. For now, though, justice had been served, the killer had been caught, the conspiracy exposed, and the innocent protected. In the dangerous game of international intrigue, it was perhaps all that one small Belgian detective could reasonably hope to accomplish. But as Poirot left Scotland Yard that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows, other players were already planning their next move in a game that would ultimately decide the fate of nations. Chapter 9. The Hidden Hand Revealed. 3 days after Colonel Blackwood's arrest, Poirot received an unexpected visitor at his lodgings. The gentleman who presented himself was immaculately dressed with the bearing of high government office, though he declined to give his name or official position. Monsieur Poirot, the visitor began, settling into the offered chair with practiced ease, I come to you on behalf of certain parties who have a keen interest in the Blackwood affair. Indeed, and what is the nature of this interest? The gentleman smiled thinly. Let us say that there are those in His Majesty's government who are concerned about the ramifications of this case. Colonel Blackwood's claims about government involvement, we would prefer that such allegations not receive undue attention. Poirot regarded his visitor with the steady gaze of a man who had encountered such official pressure before. You are suggesting that the investigation should be limited in scope. I am suggesting that certain aspects of the case might be handled with discretion. The financial crimes are clear-cut, let Blackwood hang for murder and fraud. But these broader political implications he's alluded to, well, such matters are often more complex than they appear. And if I were to disagree with this assessment, the visitor's smile became more pronounced. I think you are far too intelligent to disagree, Monsieur Poirot. After all, your position in London society, your consulting practice, these things depend upon the goodwill of influential people. It would be unfortunate if that goodwill were to be withdrawn. After the man departed, Poirot sat in thoughtful silence. The visit confirmed his suspicions that Blackwood's conspiracy had indeed reached into high places, and that powerful figures were now working to limit the damage to their own positions. But Poirot had not survived the German occupation of Belgium, nor built his reputation as a detective by yielding to threats. If anything, the attempt to silence him only strengthened his resolve to uncover the complete truth. That evening, he met secretly with Inspector Bradley at a small restaurant in Soho, far from the usual haunts of government officials and society figures. "I've been receiving pressure as well," Bradley confided over their meal. "My superiors have made it clear that the investigation should focus solely on Blackwood's personal crimes. The political aspects are to be handled by other departments." "And what do these other departments intend to do with such sensitive information?" "Nothing, I suspect. Or perhaps they'll use it to quietly remove the most compromised individuals from their positions while allowing the rest to continue their activities." Poirot nodded grimly, "which means that the conspiracy continues, merely with greater care and discretion." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected ally. Lady Pemberton entered the restaurant, having followed Inspector Bradley from Scotland Yard at considerable personal risk. "Gentlemen," she said, taking a seat at their table despite the public impropriety, "I believe you need to know something that I haven't told you. My husband didn't just discover evidence of this conspiracy, he made copies of everything and arranged for them to be delivered to American authorities if anything happened to him." Both men stared at her in astonishment. "Charles never trusted British officials completely," she continued. "He suspected that the conspiracy included people in government, so he made arrangements with colleagues in New York. If he died under suspicious circumstances, they were to receive a complete dossier of evidence." "And have they received this dossier?" Poirot asked. 3 days ago, and according to the telegram I received this morning, they're preparing to share the information with both the American press and the French government. The story will break internationally, regardless of what happens here in London." The implications were staggering. If Lord Pemberton's evidence was about to be revealed internationally, then the British government's attempts to suppress the investigation would only make them appear complicit in the conspiracy. Inspector Bradley was the first to grasp the full significance. "This changes everything. If the Americans are going to publish the evidence anyway, then there's no point in trying to cover it up here." "Precisely," Poirot agreed. "In fact, it becomes imperative for the British authorities to be seen as cooperating fully with the investigation, lest they appear to be hiding something." Lady Pemberton smiled with satisfaction. "Charles always said that the truth has a way of emerging, regardless of how powerful the people trying to suppress it might be." Over the following days the political landscape shifted dramatically. The threat of international exposure forced the British government to abandon its cover-up efforts and instead launch a comprehensive investigation of its own. Several high-ranking officials resigned quietly, while others found themselves facing serious criminal charges. Colonel Blackwood, realizing that his powerful protectors could no longer shield him, finally agreed to provide full cooperation in exchange for a commutation of his death sentence to life imprisonment. His testimony revealed the extent of the conspiracy and led to arrests across Europe. The Grand Imperial Hotel, meanwhile, had begun the process of rebuilding its reputation. Mr. Whitmore instituted new security procedures and hired additional staff to replace those who had been compromised. The hotel's role in exposing the conspiracy was quietly celebrated in certain circles, though the full story would not be publicly revealed for many years. As for Edmund Carstairs, his heroism was recognized through a small memorial service attended by those who knew the truth of his sacrifice. Lady Pemberton established a fund for his family, ensuring that his widow and children would be provided for despite the dangerous nature of his final investigation. The chess game that had begun with Lord Pemberton's discovery of financial irregularities had ended with the exposure of an international conspiracy that threatened the stability of European democracy. It was a victory for justice, but also a sobering reminder of how easily evil could infiltrate even the most respected institutions. Poirot reflected that in this case, the real heroes had been ordinary people, a banker who chose honesty over profit, a concierge who risked everything to expose the truth, and a widow who refused to let her husband's sacrifice be meaningless. Against such courage, even the most elaborate conspiracy was ultimately powerless. Chapter 10. Justice in the Final Hour. 6 months after the events at the Grand Imperial Hotel, Poirot found himself once again in the hotel's elegant lobby, this time as an honored guest at a private ceremony. The hotel had fully recovered from the scandal, and under Mr. Whitmore's careful management, had actually seen its reputation enhanced by its role in exposing the conspiracy.
Lady Pemberton stood beside him, no longer the frightened widow who had received a mysterious envelope from a dying concierge, but a woman transformed by her journey from grief to purpose. She had used her husband's financial legacy to establish a foundation dedicated to exposing corruption in international finance, work that had already begun to yield results. "It seems strange to be back here," she observed, watching the efficient bustle of hotel staff going about their duties. "So much has changed, yet the hotel continues as if nothing happened." "That is the nature of life, madame," Poirot replied. "Institutions endure while the people within them come and go. The important thing is that the truth was revealed and justice was served." Inspector Bradley joined them, carrying a folder of documents that represented the final chapter of their investigation. "The last of Blackwood's co-conspirators was sentenced yesterday," he reported. 15 years for financial fraud and conspiracy against the Crown. "The network has been completely dismantled, and Colonel Blackwood himself, life imprisonment as agreed. He's proven quite useful in helping us understand how these international criminal networks operate. His cooperation has prevented similar conspiracies from taking root elsewhere." The ceremony they were attending was a small memorial for Edmund Carstairs, whose role in exposing the conspiracy could finally be publicly acknowledged. A brass plaque was being installed near the hotel's concierge desk, honoring his service and sacrifice. His family was present, including his daughter who had followed in his footsteps by joining the Metropolitan Police. As the plaque was unveiled, revealing the simple inscription, "Edmund Carstairs, a faithful servant who died in service to truth," Poirot felt a deep satisfaction. Too often, the heroes of such cases remained unknown, their contributions forgotten in the larger drama of crime and punishment. Mr. Whitmore stepped forward to address the small gathering. Edmund Carstairs embodied the finest traditions of hotel service, discretion, loyalty, and above all, integrity. His actions saved not just individual lives, but helped preserve the financial security of our nation. We honor his memory by continuing to uphold the standards he represented. After the ceremony, Poirot lingered in the lobby, studying the familiar surroundings with new appreciation. This elegant space had been the setting for murder and conspiracy, but it had also been where truth had finally triumphed over deception. Lady Pemberton approached him with a question that had clearly been troubling her. "Monsieur Poirot, do you ever wonder if we truly won?" Blackwood claimed that others would continue his work, that the organization was larger than any individual. Poirot considered the question carefully before responding. "Madame, in my experience, evil is like a cancer. It can be cut out, but it may return if the conditions that allowed it to grow are not changed. What we accomplished here was not the elimination of all corruption, but the demonstration that such corruption can be exposed and defeated. And that demonstration serves as a warning to others, precisely. Those who might be tempted to follow Blackwood's path now know that there are people watching, people willing to sacrifice everything to preserve truth and justice. That knowledge is perhaps our greatest victory." Inspector Bradley had been listening to their conversation with the satisfaction of a man who had seen his professional duty align perfectly with moral necessity. "The ripple effects continue even now," he added. 3 other countries have launched investigations based on information we provided. The international cooperation that Blackwood feared most has become the tool of his ultimate defeat." As they prepared to leave the hotel, Poirot paused at the reception desk where a new concierge, a young man named Thomas Hartwell, was training under the supervision of an experienced assistant manager. The transition was seamless, the great machine of hospitality continuing its work uninterrupted. "Excellence is not an act but a habit," Poirot murmured, quoting an ancient philosopher. Edmund Carstairs understood that principle, and it cost him his life, but it also ensured that his sacrifice would have meaning. The 3 companions emerged into the London afternoon, where life continued its eternal rhythm. Somewhere in the city, other conspiracies might be forming, other crimes being planned, but they also knew that others like themselves would be watching, ready to stand between the innocent and those who would exploit them. The case of the Grand Imperial Hotel had ended not with spectacular action or dramatic revelation, but with the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled and justice served. In Poirot's experience, these were often the most meaningful victories, the ones that reminded him why he had chosen to dedicate his life to the pursuit of truth. As they walked away from the hotel, Lady Pemberton turned back for one final look at the building where her husband's courage had ultimately been vindicated. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said simply, "for everything. The Belgian detective touched his hat in a small salute. "It was my honor, madame. Your husband and Mr. Carstairs fought the good fight. We merely ensured that their efforts were not in vain." The Grand Imperial Hotel stood behind them, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun, ready to welcome new guests and begin new stories. Some of those stories might involve mystery and danger, but the hotel staff now knew that truth and courage could prevail even against the most sophisticated conspiracies. In the end, that knowledge might prove to be the most valuable treasure hidden within the hotel's elegant walls. Thus concludes our tale of mystery and justice at the Grand Imperial Hotel. Thank you for joining me, Stephen, for this journey into the brilliant mind of Hercule Poirot. Until next time, may your own mysteries be solved with equal satisfaction.